The Texas sun had begun its slow descent over the quiet college town of Glenford, casting long golden streaks across the cracked pavement and modest brick buildings that lined Main Street. It was a town that never made the headlines, too ordinary, too forgotten, except maybe for the local university that sat perched on the hill like an aging monument to dreams once vivid, now dulled by reality. And somewhere within that mix of routine and resignation, there lived a young man named Ethan Walker. Ethan was 23, a third-year law student with dark circles under his eyes and calluses on his hands. He didn't come from privilege. His life was not lined with safety nets or soft landings. He carried the weight of too many things a man his age shouldn't have to carry. A mountain of student debt, a part-time job at a downtown diner, and a heart still aching from a funeral that came too soon. His father, Gregory Walker, had died just 9 months earlier. Cancer, the fast kind. The kind that doesn't negotiate dots since then. Ethan had been in survival mode. He had no choice. The house he shared with his mother, Angela, was a small single-story home at the edge of town. The lawn was overgrown, the paint on the porch peeling, and the mailbox tilted at a permanent slant, like the whole place was just too tired to stand upright anymore. But it was home. Or at least it had been. Angela Walker had once been a vibrant woman, known for her warm smile and stronger-than-steel spirit. But lately, her body had begun to fail her. Doctors used long words that Ethan could barely pronounce. Lupus, inflammation, kidney complications. They handed him pamphlets and prescription slips. While asking about insurance, they all knew he didn't have that. So, every morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise, cooked his mother breakfast, kissed her forehead, and walked 4 miles to the university. Because the bus pass had expired, he spent his days buried in textbooks and case law, and his nights wiping tables and refilling ketchup bottles at Moe's Diner, trying to memorize constitutional amendments while listening to the sound of sizzling grease and clinking glass. He didn't complain. Not because it didn't hurt, but because complaining never paid a bill. His classmates didn't know the whole story. They knew Ethan as the quiet guy in the back row, always tired, always serious, always scribbling notes with the intensity of someone who couldn't afford to fail, which, in truth, he couldn't. Ethan's dream wasn't just to graduate law school. It was to build a life that didn't look like the one he was born into. He wanted to fight for people like his mother, who had done everything right and still got left behind. He wanted to change the system, one case at a time. He just needed to survive long enough to get his degree. But survival lately felt like a luxury. On the first Thursday of October, Ethan received a phone call that would change everything. It was just after 10 p.m., the diner had just closed, and he was sweeping up the last of the crumbs beneath booth 7. His phone buzzed in his back pocket. An unknown number. Normally, he wouldn't answer, but something, a strange pull in his gut, made him press accept. Mr. Ethan Walker? The voice on the other end was precise, clipped, and unmistakably wealthy. The kind of voice that had never waited in line or checked a price tag. Yes? He answered cautiously, wiping sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his worn-out shirt. My name is Margaret Ellington. I represent a client who would like to speak with you privately. Her name is Vivian Blackstone. She has a ... proposition. Are you available tomorrow evening? Ethan frowned. I'm sorry, who is this again? And why me? A pause. Then the woman's voice softened slightly. Miss Blackstone read your scholarship essay, the one published by the university's legal journal last semester. She found your story compelling, personal, brave. She believes you may be the right person for a unique arrangement. Arrangement? Ethan's heart thudded. What kind of arrangement? She explained it herself. Can we confirm 7 p.m. at the Belmore Hotel? Private dining suite, 14th floor. She insists on confidentiality. Everything about it felt strange, like the beginning of a dream that might quickly spiral into a nightmare. But there was something in the name Vivian Blackstone that stirred recognition. A rumor, a shadow. He remembered hearing her name during undergrad, the reclusive widow who lived in the historic manor up on Oak Ridge. No photos, no interviews. Just whispers of wealth, lawsuits, and a family tragedy no one dared to ask about twice. Still, Ethan couldn't afford to be proud or cautious. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "I'll be there." He hung up, pocketed his phone, and walked home beneath a blanket of stars that felt colder than usual. His mother was asleep when he arrived. He pulled the blanket over her shoulders, reheated some leftover soup, and sat at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook, trying to imagine every possible outcome of that mysterious invitation note. Was it a scholarship? A job? Some sort of mentorship? Or was it something worse? A setup? A trap? A cruel game played by someone too rich to care about consequences? And next evening, Ethan borrowed a blazer from his neighbor, Malcolm, a retired barber who had once marched with Dr. King. The sleeves were a little short and the collar too wide, but it would do Dot when he arrived at the Belmore Hotel. A valet opened his door like he belonged there. He didn't. The lobby was lined with marble floors, golden chandeliers, and the scent of eucalyptus drifting from the spa across the hall. He stepped into the elevator, hands sweating, heart pounding, when the doors opened on the 14th floor. A woman in a sharp black suit greeted him. "Mr. Walker, Miss Blackstone is expecting you." She led him through a hallway lined with modern art and into a private suite that overlooked the city skyline. A long dining table stood in the center, lit by low golden lamps. And at the far end of it, seated like royalty in exile, was Vivian Blackstone. She was 71, but time had not softened her presence. If anything, it had carved it into marble. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun, so precise it felt like an act of war. Her eyes were pale gray, not warm, not cruel, just unreadable. She wore a navy silk dress and diamond earrings that caught the light with every slight movement. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice like velvet over steel. "Sit." He obeyed. They ate in near silence. Salmon, asparagus, red wine. Ethan's throat was too dry for food, but he forced himself to chew. Then she spoke. "I'll be blunt, Ethan. I'm not interested in mentorship or charity. What I need is partnership of a very particular kind." He said nothing, just listened. "I've lived most of my life in control of my companies, my name, my legacy. But time, as you can imagine, begins to chip away at certainty. I have no heirs, no children, no one I trust to carry forward what I've built. So I've decided to make an unconventional decision." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "I want to get married. To you." The room fell silent. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. Ethan blinked, laughed once, nervously. "I'm sorry. Did you just say married?" "Yes." He stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "I don't want love. I want order, structure, legality. I want to choose what happens to my fortune, not leave it to lawyers and scavengers." "You're intelligent, ambitious, struggling, yes, but not broken. I read every word of your essay, Ethan. I saw in it something ... clean, something honest. You need help. I need legacy. So here's what I propose." She slid a folder across the table. "In exchange for your agreement to a legal, confidential marriage, I will clear all your debts, fund the remainder of your education, and place your name on the deed to one of my properties. In return, You will live with me, accompany me to public events as needed, and refrain from romantic entanglements for the duration of our contract, 1 year. Ethan stared at the papers. Numbers, clauses, signatures. I don't understand. Why me? You don't even know me. Vivian smiled. For the first time, no, but I knew your father. And just like that, the room shifted. Ethan sat back, pulse racing. You knew him? I did. But that ... is a story for another night. She rose from her chair. The meeting was over. I'll give you 3 days to decide. After that, the offer expires. Good night, Mr. Walker. And with that, she left him sitting in a storm of questions, papers, and a choice that would alter the course of everything he thought he understood about loyalty, survival, and the ghosts that wealth refuses to bury. The wind howled through the bare branches lining the long driveway as Ethan stepped out of the cab. The Blackstone estate sat like a shadow on the hilltop, vast and imposing, its stone walls weathered by time, but unmoved by it. Massive iron gates had opened upon his arrival, but now loomed behind him like they had closed the world off. He stood there for a moment, taking in the towering structure before him. The windows were tall and narrow, mostly dark, save for a single warm light flickering in an upstairs chamber, like a watchful eye peering down. The air was sharp, tinged with pine and a coldness that cut deeper than temperature. It was the kind of silence that whispered of old things, of past, lives of secrets too heavy to die. He stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The mansion's massive oak doors opened before he even reached them. A man in a black three-piece suit stood waiting. Pale, tall, hair graying at the temples. The kind of man who had once fought wars with nothing but his eyes. Mr. Walker, he said with a slight nod. Miss Blackstone is expecting you. Please, follow me. No name. No smile. No attempt at comfort. Just a gesture of the hand and a sharp turn into the house's cavernous hall. Ethan followed, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. That seemed to suck the outside world away. The inside was even colder, not in temperature. The marble floor radiated subtle warmth, but in feeling. Everything was pristine, elegant, and distant. Antique vases on mahogany pedestals. Oil paintings of people who probably never smiled. A grand chandelier hung above them, dripping with crystals like frozen tears. Every footstep echoed into the bones of the house. This was not a home. It was a fortress. A monument. A cage. They walked in silence for several minutes, past towering bookshelves, arched doorways, and locked doors. Then the butler stopped at a heavy double door and pushed. It opened with ceremonial gravity. Inside, the room was drenched in amber light. A fire crackled in a stone hearth that reached the ceiling. Above it, a massive portrait of a man, stern, proud, dressed in military uniform. Beside him, seated like a queen on a velvet armchair, was Vivian Blackstone. This time, she wasn't. In a silk dress. She wore a deep burgundy robe with gold trim, her silver hair cascading loosely over her shoulders. But her posture, her gaze, her aura, it hadn't changed. She didn't acknowledge the butler. She didn't need to. Mr. Walker, she said, gesturing to the armchair across from hers. Sit. He obeyed, wordlessly, his throat dry. The butler disappeared behind them. The doors clicking shut. The silence between them hung thick for a moment, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Would you like something to drink? She asked. No, thank you, Ethan replied. Her eyes scanned him, not judging, measuring. I assume you've had time to think about my offer, she said, her voice smooth, deliberate. You're here. That says something. Ethan shifted in his seat. It says I'm curious. It doesn't mean I understand. You don't need to understand, she said, folding her hands. You just need to decide. He frowned. You said you knew my father. That's not a detail you just drop and walk away from. She nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting that question. Your father and I crossed paths once. Many years ago. He worked for my late husband, Harold Blackstone. Briefly, there was a business deal. A betrayal. Consequences. That's all you need to know. No, Ethan said, sitting up straighter. That's not all I need to know. If I'm agreeing to marry you, even under contract, I deserve the truth. Vivian tilted her head slightly, as if inspecting him for cracks. What would you do with that truth, Ethan? Rewrite the past? Undo what was done? I'd try to understand why I'm here. Why me? Why now? She was silent for a moment. Then she rose from her chair and walked toward the window. Her reflection shimmered in the glass. An older woman surrounded by a lifetime of silence. Because I'm tired, she said at last. Tired of vultures circling. Tired of watching everything I built be eyed by greedy, trembling hands. I want control. I want peace. And strangely, I believe you can help me find both. Ethan's brow furrowed. By marrying you? She turned back to him. By being the person your father wasn't. The word struck like a slap. Not in anger, in confusion. You don't know what. He was, Ethan said. I know enough, she replied. They stared at each other. Something old and wounded passed between them. Something Ethan didn't yet have words for. Look, he said finally, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know what kind of ghosts you're chasing, but dragging me into this ... whatever this is, it feels wrong. Vivian moved closer, her eyes now burning with an intensity that was almost painful. What feels wrong is letting strangers dismantle my legacy the moment I die. What feels wrong is watching parasites pretend to mourn while they sharpen their knives. You think this is about romance? About companionship? It's about survival, Ethan. Yours and mine. And whether you like it or not, we are both running out of time. He exhaled, looking down at the folder on the table between them. It was still there, the offer. Black ink, red wax. Signatures that would bind them. This feels insane, he muttered. Good, she replied. Sanity rarely changes lives. He looked up, startled. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not softness, but ... sadness. Or maybe regret. You can walk away, she said. There's no penalty. No threats. But if you do, you'll walk back into debt, illness, and exhaustion. You'll keep pouring yourself into a system that was never built for men like you. Or you can take my hand, enter this agreement, secure your future, and maybe, just maybe, rewrite the ending of your family's story. He swallowed hard. The room seemed smaller now, the fire louder, the choice heavier. I need time, he said. You have 48 hours, she answered. And one more meeting. Another meeting? She nodded. With my lawyer. He'll explain the terms in full. No tricks, no fine print. And after that, we marry. Quietly, efficiently. No ceremony. Just a signature and a witness. Then we begin. Ethan stood, his legs suddenly unsteady. Why do I feel like this is the start of something I won't be able to walk away from? Because it is, she said softly. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Ethan, she called. He looked back. Whatever else you believe, know this. I don't want to hurt you, but I will not let anyone hurt what I've built. Not again. The doors closed behind him with a quiet finality. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He walked the streets of Glenford under a moonless sky, his thoughts spiraling. Every step felt like a question, every breath a decision. He thought of his mother, of hospital bills and eviction notices. He thought of his father, the man he knew and the one Vivian saw. And somewhere between doubt and desperation, a seed began to sprout. What if this was a door? A strange, cold, dangerous door, but a door nonetheless. Could he really afford not to walk through it? The next day, he met the lawyer, an old man with a sharp voice and sharper eyes. The terms were exactly as described. No loopholes, no tricks. A 1-year marriage contract. Financial freedom in exchange for domestic presence and total discretion. The lawyer didn't ask Ethan if he was sure. He simply placed the papers in front of him and waited. And as Ethan signed the final page, the pen trembling in his fingers, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And the battlefield was just beginning to reveal itself. The world didn't shift all at once. It creaked, quietly, like an old house under pressure. That's how Ethan felt as he stood at the threshold of his mother's hospital room, holding a folder that weighed more than paper ever should. In that folder was a marriage contract, legal, cold, binding. The path it offered was twisted, perhaps dangerous, but it was a path. And in that moment, paths were scarce. His mother, Caroline, lay propped up in her hospital bed, fragile yet luminous in a way only mothers are to their sons. Her skin was pale, her hair thinner than it had been a year ago, but her eyes still held that same steady flame. "You haven't said anything for 5 minutes," Ethan murmured, handing her the folder. She looked at the pages slowly, methodically, not rushing to judgment. "Is she dying?" she asked. He blinked. "What? This woman, Vivian Blackstone, is she dying?" I don't know," he replied. "She didn't say, but something tells me she's running out of time." Caroline leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of the page. "Then she's not marrying you for love?" "No." "For children?" Ethan scoffed. "Definitely not. Then why?" "She wants control. Over her estate, over her narrative, over everything." His mother was silent for a moment. Then she set the folder down. "I don't like it," she said plainly. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But you're considering it." "I signed it already. I haven't given it to her lawyer yet. But I signed it." Caroline's face softened, but only slightly. "You always were the one to carry the fire, even when it burned you." Ethan looked away, ashamed of the weight in his chest. "I just want you to be okay. I want to get us out of this hole. I want something to change." His mother reached out and took his hand. "Then do it. But do it with your eyes open, Ethan. Don't let desperation blind you to the cost." He nodded, feeling the full force of her trust settle onto his shoulders. 2 days later, the courthouse was empty. Just Ethan, Vivian, the lawyer, a clerk, and silence. No flowers. No rings. No family. The ceremony was over in less than 15 minutes. A single signature. A single witness. A single moment that would redraw the shape of Ethan's life forever. Afterward, Vivian didn't say much. She simply nodded and gestured toward the waiting car. A vintage black Bentley, polished to a mirror sheen. Ethan climbed in. The door closed behind him with a weight that felt like a cell. The drive to the estate was quiet. Vivian sat beside him, staring out the window as the town faded behind them. She wore a gray coat lined with fur, her silver hair pulled back in a chignon. Regal, untouchable. At one point, Ethan dared to speak. "So, that's it? We're married now?" "Yes," she said, without looking at him. He swallowed. "Are we going to tell anyone?" "Eventually, when it suits me." He frowned. And until then, we live. As agreed, that night the mansion was colder than before. Not literally. The fireplaces were lit, the hallways glowing, but emotionally. The staff greeted Ethan with blank faces and lowered eyes. No one congratulated him. No one offered champagne or cake. It was as if the entire house had agreed to pretend nothing had changed. Vivian showed him to his quarters, a large room on the west wing of the estate, far from her own. The bed was large. The windows looked out onto the lake. The closet had already been stocked with suits that fit perfectly, as if someone had taken his measurements weeks ago. You'll have access to the library, the garden, the dining hall, and the gym, she said. I've instructed the staff to assist you if needed. Your schedule is your own, but there will be appearances, events, dinners. When I say we go, we go. Understood? Ethan nodded, half in awe, half in fear. Good, she said. Then she turned and left without another word. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time that night, staring at the flames in the fireplace. Married, to a woman 5 decades his senior. In a house that felt less like a home and more like a museum of forgotten memories. And yet, part of him felt numb, as if he'd been drifting for so long that even strange shores felt like salvation. Days passed in a strange rhythm. He would wake up, shower, dress, eat breakfast alone, walk the estate grounds, and return to his room. Sometimes he read in the library. Sometimes he jogged on the private trail around the lake. Sometimes he simply sat in silence and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Vivian rarely appeared during the day. She had her own schedule. Meetings, calls, an endless string of private conversations behind closed doors. When they did see each other, usually at dinner, she was polite, reserved, and distant. One evening, after nearly 2 weeks of this quiet arrangement, she broke the routine. I've arranged for us to attend the winter gala in the city next weekend, she said over a forkful of lamb. Ethan looked up. Isn't that event for billionaires and bored politicians? She raised an eyebrow. Precisely. I'm going to stand out. Not if you wear the tuxedo I've chosen. He sighed. And what's the purpose of this outing? She sipped her wine. Perception. Legacy. A reminder to the leeches that I'm still in control, and that I now have a partner. Not a romantic partner. She smirked. Romance is for the weak. The gala was held at the Rosewood Conservatory, a towering hall of glass and gold. Chandeliers shimmered overhead. Classical music played from a live quartet. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns mingled like predators in a velvet jungle. Vivian was radiant in a black velvet dress, with a diamond necklace that glimmered like a constellation. Ethan stood beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, feeling like a mannequin on display. People whispered. They stared. Some nodded politely. Others recoiled in subtle disapproval. Vivian didn't care. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of royalty. This is my kingdom, she whispered to Ethan. They may loathe me, but they respect me. And that's far more useful. The night was long, the smiles fake. The handshakes rehearsed, but Ethan played his part. He listened. He nodded. He spoke when spoken to. He watched. He learned . And for the first time, he realized that this wasn't just a transaction . It was a test. A game. A war . Back at the estate that night, he confronted her. Why me? He asked again, leaning against the doorway of her study. She looked up from her papers. We've been over this. Not the real reason. She set down her pen. Because you're not stupid. Because you know how to stay silent. Because when the vultures come, I need someone beside me who knows what they smell like. That's not an answer. She stood, walked to the fireplace, and stared into the flames. Your father betrayed my husband, she said. It cost him everything, and I never forgot. Ethan's heart thudded. So this is punishment? No, she said. This is reclamation. Of what? Control. He stepped closer. And what happens when you die? Do I get everything? She turned to him. You'll get what you've earned. And if I haven't earned anything, then you'll leave with nothing but your name. Just like your father left my husband. Ethan clenched his jaw. Is this really about revenge? No, she whispered. It's about legacy. Mine. And maybe yours. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Ethan finally nodded. Then I'll play my part. But don't expect me to play it quietly. She smiled, just faintly. Good. I hate quiet men. And with that, she returned to her desk. Ethan walked back to his wing, feeling the ground shift beneath him. He wasn't just inside her world now. He was part of it. And whether he liked it or not, he had married into something far bigger than himself. At first glance, the Blackstone estate operated with clockwork precision. Meals appeared at exact hours. The grounds were perfectly trimmed. Every room, every hallway, every antique mirror was dusted to shine. The silence inside the mansion wasn't empty. It was curated, managed, sculpted. A stillness that came not from peace, but from expectation. Ethan quickly realized that beneath the surface of luxury, something was wrong. It started with the staff. There were 15 in total. Housekeepers, groundskeepers, a private chef, a chauffeur, a gardener, and a few assistants Ethan couldn't quite place. Yet they moved through the mansion like ghosts. Not a single one made eye contact. Not once did someone call him by name. They avoided conversation with him, and each other. Their steps were soft, their expressions blank, their voices barely whispers when they did speak. He once asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Dorsey, how long she'd worked there. She paused mid-dusting, her eyes flickering to a hallway camera before she said, A very long time, sir. And that was all she would say. Vivian, on the other hand, was unchanged, composed, cold, in control. She spoke to Ethan mostly during dinners, where she outlined the week's plans, her social agenda, or commented idly on political affairs. She didn't inquire about his feelings. She didn't speak of his mother's health. She never even mentioned his name unless necessary. One night at dinner, he broke the rhythm. Why does everyone act like they're afraid to speak here? Vivian didn't flinch. They're not paid to speak. They're paid to serve. That's not an answer. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Do you ask the waiter at a restaurant why he doesn't share his dreams with you? This isn't a restaurant, Ethan replied, his voice tightening. It's a prison with wine glasses, Vivian smiled faintly. And yet you chose to live here. He didn't respond. He couldn't. That night, he began to wander the halls more deliberately. He'd waited weeks for the strange feeling to pass, but it hadn't. So he leaned into it. He started listening, really listening, to the way the mansion breathed when no one thought he was awake. Around 1 a.m. The halls shifted. Doors closed in unison on the east wing. A light flickered behind the stained glass door that led to the basement. He pressed his ear to the wood. Whispers. Not clear, not loud, but definitely voices. Urgent, rhythmic, almost rehearsed. He tried the knob. Locked. When he turned around, a shadow vanished down the hall. The next morning, the door was wide open. But inside, nothing but wine racks and a piano covered in dust. Ethan's paranoia grew. He began to notice other things. Locks on interior doors where no valuables should be. Paintings that seemed to have been moved recently. Books in the library with blank pages, but worn spines. And that strange humming sound in the west corridor that stopped the moment you stepped near it. One afternoon, he found the gardener, a man in his 60s named Gerald, trimming hedges near the fountain. Ethan approached slowly. Beautiful day, he offered. Gerald didn't look up. Yes, sir. You've worked her long? The clippers paused. I've seen seasons come and go, Gerald said. What happens in this house when winter comes? Ethan asked, testing the waters. Gerald's hand trembled slightly on the shears. Then he resumed cutting. I just tend the garden, sir. Ethan walked away, unsettled. Later that week, while exploring the library, he noticed one book slightly misaligned on the shelf. Old, dusty, with a torn spine. He pulled it, and with a click, a narrow panel on the wall cracked open. Behind it, a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. His breath caught in his chest. Every rational thought told him to close it and walk away. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight. The staircase led to a hidden hallway, carved between the walls of the house. Cold stone. No windows. Just a single path ending in a heavy iron door. Another. Lock. But this time, his luck turned. That evening, back in his room, he found a small brass key tucked inside his wardrobe drawer. No note, no explanation. He returned to the hidden corridor the next night. The key fit. The door creaked open into a small chamber, once an office, maybe, or a study. Dust layered every surface. Old books, ledgers, and personal letters sat untouched on the desk. But it was the framed photo that stopped Ethan's breath. A man and woman, young, vibrant, alive. Vivian and Harold Blackstone. The man, her late husband, stood proudly in front of what appeared to be the very mansion they were in now. He had kind eyes, a natural smile, the kind of presence that radiated trust. Beneath the photo was a sealed envelope marked, "For V.B. only." Ethan opened it. Inside was a short note, handwritten. If you're reading this, then you've found what I hoped no one would. This house was never meant to be a tomb. But Vivian, she couldn't let it go. Not after what happened. And now, neither can I. There was no signature. Ethan's heart pounded. He rifled through the drawers. Beneath layers of paper, he found a black leather-bound journal. At first, he thought it was Harold's. But the handwriting, it was Vivian's. Careful, elegant, deliberate. He flipped through pages filled with personal thoughts. Entries about grief, business losses, names he didn't recognize. And then a line that chilled him. They took everything from me. And now I will take something back. Not money, not property. Blood. Their son will wear my last name, live in my house, sleep beneath my roof. Let them watch from the grave. Ethan nearly dropped the book. Their son. There was no doubt who she meant. Him. His father. A man who died 4 years ago in a car accident Ethan never understood. The man whose financial secrets had only begun to surface before his death. Debts, failed investments, friends turned enemies. Lawsuits that vanished without explanation. Was it possible? He scanned more entries, names, transactions, mentions of the Walker family. Slowly, a web formed. Vivian hadn't married him out of loneliness. She had married him out of vengeance. That night, at dinner, Ethan could barely eat. Vivian, poised as ever, noticed. You're quiet, she observed. I found something today. He said slowly. Oh? She asked, slicing into her lamb. A hidden office, behind the library. She didn't stop chewing. You knew it was there? I know every inch of this house, she said calmly. What did you find? He stared at her. Truth. She set her knife down, wiped her mouth, and looked him in the eyes for the first time in days. Then I hope you found it useful. She said. The mask slipped, just for a second, enough to reveal the steel beneath the silk. After dinner, Ethan went to his room and locked the door. He reread the journal. Every word, every phrase. Pieced it together. Vivian hadn't just chosen him. She targeted him. And now he was trapped in a house, built on lies, with a woman who had more power than he ever imagined, and a past darker than any courtroom case he'd studied. His mind raced. If she orchestrated this marriage as a form of punishment, what else was she capable of? Was he truly safe? What had happened to the others? The young men mentioned by the butler. The whispers he now suspected were not metaphorical. Sleep didn't come that night, only a promise. He would uncover everything. And when the time came. He would be ready. At first glance, the Blackstone estate operated with clockwork precision. Meals appeared at exact hours. The grounds were perfectly trimmed. Every room, every hallway, every antique mirror was dusted to shine. The silence inside the mansion wasn't empty. It was curated, managed, sculpted. A stillness that came not from peace, but from expectation. Ethan quickly realized that beneath the surface of luxury, something was wrong. It started with the staff. There were 15 in total. Housekeepers, groundskeepers, a private chef, a chauffeur, a gardener, and a few assistants Ethan couldn't quite place. Yet they moved through the mansion like ghosts. Not a single one made eye contact. Not once did someone call him by name. They avoided conversation with him and each other. Their steps were soft, their expressions blank, their voices barely whispers when they did speak. He once asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Dorsey, how long she'd worked there. She paused mid-dusting, her eyes flickering to a hallway camera before she said, "A very long time, sir." And that was all she would say. Vivian, on the other hand, was unchanged, composed, cold, in control. She spoke to Ethan mostly during dinners, where she outlined the week's plans, her social agenda, or commented idly on political affairs. She didn't inquire about his feelings. She didn't speak of his mother's health. She never even mentioned his name unless necessary. One night at dinner, he broke the rhythm. Why does everyone act like they're afraid to speak here? Vivian didn't flinch. They're not paid to speak. They're paid to serve. That's not an answer. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Do you ask the waiter at a restaurant why he doesn't share his dreams with you? This isn't a restaurant, Ethan replied, his voice tightening. It's a prison with wine glasses. Vivian smiled faintly. And yet you chose to live here. He didn't respond. He couldn't. That night, he began to wander the halls more deliberately. He'd waited weeks for the strange feeling to pass, but it hadn't. So he leaned into it. He started listening, really listening, to the way the mansion breathed when no one thought he was awake. Around 1 a.m. The halls shifted. Doors closed in unison on the east wing. A light flickered behind the stained glass door that led to the basement. He pressed his ear to the wood. Whispers. Not clear. Not loud, but definitely voices. Urgent, rhythmic, almost rehearsed. He tried the knob. Locked. When he turned around, a shadow vanished down the hall. The next morning, the door was wide open. But inside, nothing but wine racks and a piano. Covered in dust, Ethan's paranoia grew. He began to notice other things. Locks on interior doors where no valuables should be. Paintings that seemed to have been moved recently. Books in the library with blank pages, but worn spines. And that strange humming sound in the west corridor that stopped the moment you stepped near it. One afternoon, he found the gardener, a man in his 60s named Gerald, trimming hedges near the fountain. Ethan approached slowly. Beautiful day. He offered. Gerald didn't look up. Yes, sir. You've worked here long? The clippers paused. I've seen seasons come and go, Gerald said. What happens in this house when winter comes? Ethan asked, testing the waters. Gerald's hand trembled slightly on the shears. Then he resumed cutting. I just tend the garden, sir. Ethan walked away, unsettled. Later that week, while exploring the library, he noticed one book slightly misaligned on the shelf. Old, dusty, with a torn spine. He pulled it, and with a click, a narrow panel on the wall cracked open. Behind it, a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. His breath caught in his chest. Every rational thought told him to close it and walk away. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight. The staircase led to a hidden hallway, carved between the walls of the house, cold stone. No windows. Just a single path ending in a heavy iron door. Another lock. But this time, his luck turned. That evening, back in his room, he found a small brass key tucked inside his wardrobe drawer. No note, no explanation. He returned to the hidden corridor. The next night, the key fit. The door creaked open into a small chamber, once an office, maybe, or a study. Dust layered every surface. Old books, ledgers, and personal letters sat untouched on the desk. But it was the framed photo that stopped Ethan's breath. A man and woman, young, vibrant, alive. Vivian and Harold Blackstone. The man, her late husband, stood proudly in front of what appeared to be the very mansion they were in now. He had kind eyes, a natural smile, the kind of presence that radiated trust. Beneath the photo was a sealed envelope marked, "For V.B. only." Ethan opened it. Inside was a short note, handwritten. "If you're reading this, then you've found what I hoped no one would. This house was never meant to be a tomb." But Vivian, she couldn't let it go. Not after what happened. And now, neither can I. There was no signature. Ethan's heart pounded. He rifled through the drawers. Beneath layers of paper, he found a black leather-bound journal. At first, he thought it was Harold's. But the handwriting, it was Vivian's, careful, elegant, deliberate. He flipped through. Pages filled with personal thoughts, entries about grief, business losses, names he didn't recognize. And then a line that chilled him. "They took everything from me, and now I will take something back. Not money, not property. Blood. Their son will wear my last name, live in my house, sleep beneath my roof. Let them watch from the grave." Ethan nearly dropped the book. Their son. There was no doubt who she meant. His father. The man who died 4 years ago in a car accident. Ethan never understood. The man whose financial secrets had only begun to surface before his death. Debts, failed investments, friends turned enemies. Lawsuits that vanished without explanation. Was it possible? He scanned more entries, names, transactions, mentions of the Walker family. Slowly, a web formed. Vivian hadn't married him out of loneliness. She had married him out of vengeance. That night, at dinner, Ethan could barely eat. Vivian, poised as ever, noticed. "You're quiet," she observed. "I found something today." He said slowly. "Oh?" She asked, slicing into her lamb. "A hidden office, behind the library." She didn't stop chewing. "You knew it was there?" "I know every inch of this house," she said calmly. "What did you find?" He stared at her. Truth. She set her knife down, wiped her mouth, and looked him in the eyes for the first time in days. "Then I hope you found it useful," she said. The mask slipped, just for a second, enough to reveal the steel beneath the silk. After dinner, Ethan went to his room and locked the door. He reread the journal. Every word, every phrase, pieced it together. Vivian hadn't just chosen him. She targeted him. And now he was trapped in a house, built on lies, with a woman who had more power than he ever imagined, and a past darker than any courtroom case he'd studied, his mind. Race. If she orchestrated this marriage as a form of punishment, what else was she capable of? Was he truly safe? What had happened to the others? The young men mentioned by the butler, the whispers he now suspected, were not metaphorical. Sleep didn't come that night, only a promise. He would uncover everything. And when the time came. He would be ready. confrontation with Vivian Balakska Ethan spent the following days with a storm in his mind. The revelation of Vivian's journal, the fragments of transactions, the names buried in notes, it all fit together like pieces of a dark, twisted puzzle. He wasn't a husband, not even a partner. He was a pawn carefully selected, manipulated, pushed into a game he never knew. Existed. She wanted him there. Not for love, not even for companionship, but as a symbol, as punishment. And yet, Vivian carried on as if nothing had changed. Elegant, cold, unshaken. The next morning, Ethan woke before the sun. He couldn't lie in bed for more than 5 minutes. The ceiling felt like it was collapsing on his chest. He had to confront her. He had to leave. But most of all, he had to understand, how far was she willing to go? He found her in the garden, wearing a navy blue silk robe and a wide hat that shaded half her face. She was watering orchids, like always, as if she hadn't dragged a young man into a marriage built on ruins and lies. "Vivian," he said, his voice steady but tight. She didn't turn. "Ethan, did you sleep well?" "No. And you know why?" She paused. "The water ran from the spout longer than necessary." "Ah, so you found it." He swallowed hard. The casualness in her voice shook him more than he expected. "You wrote all that? Everything was real?" Vivian set the watering can beside the pot and finally looked at him. "Do you really need me to confirm it? You're a bright student. I'm sure you've already connected the dots." "My father." Ethan's fists clenched. "You said in the journal that he ruined your life, that you lost everything because of him. So why punish me? Why use me?" Vivian walked over to a stone bench and sat down gracefully, as if they were discussing Renaissance art, not manipulation and revenge. "Because you're his legacy, his blood, the fruit of the man who destroyed my home, who drove my husband to suicide and left me with the ashes of a fallen empire. You ... She pointed at him, not with anger, but with calm conviction. "You are the continuation of the legacy that wrecked me." Ethan felt a burn in his throat. "You think vengeance is justice?" "No," she said, "but it's all I had left." "You could have sued him, rebuilt your fortune, your name, but you chose this? A fake marriage? A golden prison?" My name was dragged through the mud. The press called me a con artist, an accomplice. Friends vanished. Shareholders turned on me. Yes, I rebuilt, but with shards, and you were the final piece. A circle that needed closing." Ethan breathed deep. His eyes stung, but his voice didn't waver. "You don't have the right to destroy someone's life because of the pain you carry." Vivian crossed her legs with elegance and exhaled softly. "Pain shapes people, Ethan. Yours brought you here. Mine turned me to stone. Then tell me, Vivian ... How many others? How many came before me?" The question hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Vivian took her time. 3. Ethan's eyes widened. 3? Promising young men, with family histories similar to yours. None of them lasted. One ran. One tried to blackmail me. The last, she glanced at the sky, lost himself completely. "You destroyed lives." "No, I gave them the chance to face their own legacies. Some couldn't handle it. But you, Ethan ... you're different. You have fire, fury, conviction. That's why you're still here. You're not complimenting me, Vivian. You're testing me." She smiled for the first time that morning. "Maybe both." Ethan sat down in front of her, eyes locked. "It ends here. Today, you can keep your journals, your hidden keys, your cursed bloodlines. I'm leaving this house." Vivian leaned forward as if preparing to whisper a secret. "And the contract? Tear it up. And your mother's medical bills? Her surgery next month? Your name, which will no longer be Walker, but will carry the stigma of a young man who abandoned a sick widow. Ethan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. She knew. She knew everything. The hospital's deadlines, his mother's overdue rent, her deteriorating condition. You used me, and now you're trying to trap me with guilt. I don't trap anyone, Ethan, but I'm very good at designing cages that close by themselves. He stood without another word. As he turned, her voice echoed behind him. I chose you because you were strong enough to survive the truth. Prove me right. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The mansion felt tighter, heavier. The hallways didn't whisper anymore. They screamed. The walls watched. Every frame, every shadow reminded him. You're inside a game you never started. The next morning, Vivian didn't appear for breakfast, nor lunch. Nor dinner. The house felt deserted. The staff had vanished. Only Mr. Harris crossed paths with Ethan in a corridor, casting a glance that almost looked like pity. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He climbed the stairs to a room and knocked. No answer. He turned the doorknob. Unlocked. Vivian was seated by the fireplace, still wearing the same robe as the morning before, but without the hat. Her silver hair fell loose, disheveled. Her face, bare of makeup, revealed deep lines he hadn't noticed before. For the first time, she looked. Human. Did you win? Ethan asked, breaking the silence. She didn't respond. Is this your victory? An empty house, a broken young man, a life that isn't yours? Vivian looked at him. I became what I hated. Ethan sat in the chair opposite her. The fire cast strange shadows on the floor. There's still time to change, to make something right out of all this. How? By letting go, letting me go. She laughed. A weak, bitter sound. You really think you'll leave without scars? I'm already scarred. Vivian turned her face to the fire. Then go. But take the only thing I can give without guilt, the truth. She held out an envelope. Inside were documents. The marriage contract torn. His mother's hospital bills paid. A revised will transferring the estate to Ethan. He stared at her, stunned. Why? Because in the end, what was left of me recognized something in you I lost long ago. Hope. Ethan clutched the papers. This doesn't erase what you did. No, she agreed, but maybe it's a beginning. He stood, walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You took everything from me, but you gave me something to fight for. I hope you find peace, Vivian. Truly. She didn't reply. That night, Ethan left the mansion, walked out without looking back. The wind was cold, but for the first time, he felt free. The following days were marked by silence, and not the comforting kind. It was the kind of silence that crept under the skin, settling deep in the bones. The kind that made the ticking of clocks sound like drumbeats. Ethan had walked away from the mansion, from Vivian, from a world that had tried to consume him. But the scars she left weren't visible. They lived in his thoughts, in the shadows behind his eyes. He rented a small studio apartment near campus. Nothing fancy, just a roof over his head, a bed that creaked, and a desk where he piled everything he knew. Files, photos, notes, the shredded contract, the proof of paid medical bills, Vivian's torn legacy in his hands. But as much as he wanted to move on, something inside him refused to let the truth stay buried. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about him. It was about the system that allowed someone like Vivian Blackstone to orchestrate a human chess game for decades, unchecked. 3 others had gone through what he had. Maybe more. Maybe worse. Ethan couldn't leave their stories untold. And so he started digging. The first person he contacted was Peter Grant, his closest friend from law school. Someone who had always questioned Vivian's intentions from day one. Peter didn't hesitate. Ethan showed up at his door. "You're back," Peter said, stepping aside to let him in. "You look like hell." "I've been there," Ethan replied. "Now I need your help." Over 2 steaming cups of coffee, Ethan unfolded the story, the journal, the contract, the confessions, the hidden identities, the paid-off hospital bills. Everything. Peter listened in silence, brows furrowed, tapping his fingers against the ceramic mug. When Ethan finally stopped talking, Peter leaned back and crossed his arms. "You know this won't hold in court." "I know. She's too smart. She's covered her tracks. This is circumstantial, emotional. We need more." Ethan nodded. "That's why I came to you." Peter opened a drawer and pulled out a small notepad. "We'll build a case. Start with what we know, and then dig deeper. I have access to legal archives. We'll trace every alias, every document she filed over the last 20 years. Ethan felt a surge of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't alone. They worked through the night. By dawn, the floor was covered in open folders and post-it notes. Names, dates, transaction records, witness leads. But there was one person Ethan hadn't spoken to yet. One person who had remained a silent witness throughout the chaos. Mr. Harris, the head butler of the Blackstone mansion. He hadn't seen Mr. Harris in the days following his departure. The man had always been composed, eerily silent, moving through rooms like a shadow. But Ethan remembered that one look, the glance of pity in the hallway. It was time to find him. Ethan and Peter tracked him down through public records and a contact at the estate management company. It turned out Mr. Harris had resigned the day after Ethan left the mansion, quietly, without a word. They found him living in a modest apartment in a quiet retirement complex outside the city. When Ethan knocked on the door, it opened slowly, and there he was, thinner, older, but unmistakably Mr. Harris. He didn't seem surprised. "I knew this day would come," the butler said softly, stepping aside. They sat in the living room. Tea was served. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he poured. "I stayed," he began, "because I believed I could protect the others. The young men she brought in, they were all lost. And I failed them." Ethan leaned forward. "What happened to them?" "One disappeared, simply left one night, and was never heard from again. The second attempted suicide. Survived, thank God, but vanished afterward. The third, he became so obsessed with proving her wrong that he broke into her study. She had him arrested, paid for his silence." Ethan's heart sank. "She silenced everyone?" Mr. Harris nodded. "Money, influence, shame, that's all it takes." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was afraid. And because I, too, owed her. She saved my wife's life once, paid for her surgery when we had nothing. I was loyal." Ethan looked at the man with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Do you have anything? Documents? Files? Anything that could help us?" The butler stood up, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were old letters, photographs, handwritten notes, scraps of a life hidden in shadows. "She kept everything," Mr. Harris said. "Every move documented, every person monitored. I copied what I could. I never knew why. Maybe I hoped someone like you would come along one day." Ethan left with the box. The next 3 days were spent cross-referencing every name and event. One lead stood out. A private investigator Vivian had hired a decade ago. His name was Marcus Doyle. According to the notes, he had been dismissed after he dug too deep. Peter made contact. Marcus agreed to meet. They met in a diner outside Houston. Marcus was in his late 50s now, grizzled, chain-smoking, and wearing sunglasses indoors. But when Ethan laid out the situation, Marcus's demeanor changed. "I remember her," he said, tapping ash into a tray. "Cold as ice. Paid well, but wanted everything buried. What did you find?" "She was laundering money through shell companies, using charitable foundations as a front. The money she claimed was lost in her husband's betrayal. Half of it was already offshore. Harold Blackstone didn't ruin her. He tried to stop her." Ethan froze. "What?" Marcus nodded. "Her husband found out about the fraud. Confronted her. She pushed the narrative that he was the villain. Days later, he was dead. Suicide, they said, but I always doubted it." Ethan felt his pulse race. "Can you testify to that?" "I can do better. I kept files. I was going to go public once. She threatened my daughter. I backed off. But now, I think it's time." Back in their apartment, Ethan and Peter assembled it. All. Testimonies, financial records, correspondence, the private investigator's files, Mr. Harris's notes. They built a timeline, a motive, a pattern. Vivian hadn't just manipulated Ethan. She had rewritten her own history, reframed herself as the victim, when in truth, she was the puppeteer behind a legacy of broken lives. But even with the case forming, Ethan hesitated. "What if she finds a way out again?" he asked. Peter looked at him. "That's not your job to worry about anymore. Your job is to tell the truth, loud enough that no one can ignore it." Ethan nodded. Together, they contacted the authorities. Federal investigators opened a file. Journalists were tipped off. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. But it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about transformation. Because Ethan had seen what darkness could do to a soul. He had lived under its roof, dined at its table, kissed its lips. And now he was determined to burn it down with truth. One morning, as he prepared to deliver the final dossier, a letter arrived. No name, just a seal he recognized Vivian's. Inside, one line. "Justice without mercy is still vengeance, Ethan." He closed the envelope. No tears. No regrets. He had made his choice. The world didn't shift all at once. No thunderstorm. No dramatic climax. Just quiet unfolding. Like the slow peeling of wallpaper, revealing something rotted beneath. Ethan had thought he'd already uncovered the core of Vivian Blackstone's deception. But what he was about to find would shatter everything he thought he understood. Began with a USB drive. Peter received it anonymously in the mail, tucked inside a manila envelope with no return address. On it, one single folder, Project Hades. Ethan plugged it into his laptop with a mix of caution and dread. Inside were documents, hundreds of them. Financial records, encrypted emails, real estate transfers, names he didn't recognize, names he did. The deeper they looked, the more it became clear. Vivian's empire wasn't built on old money. It was built on fabrication, theft, and manipulation. She hadn't simply retaliated against Ethan's father. She had constructed an entire persona, a legacy of wealth and social prestige founded on myth. Harold Blackstone had once been a legitimate businessman, but he'd grown suspicious of his wife's activities years before his death. And just as Marcus Doyle had suggested, Vivian had turned the narrative to her favor, ensuring Harold died a villain in the public eye. The files on the USB detailed how she redirected family assets into offshore accounts, then donated those funds to shell nonprofits that fed directly back into her private holdings. It was a money laundering symphony orchestrated over decades, under multiple aliases and fronts, and it didn't stop at financial crimes. One file stopped Ethan cold. Candidates, final list. It was a spreadsheet. Names, ages, occupations. Next to each one, a status. Evaluated, rejected, in process. His name was on it, so were 3 others with notes describing personality traits, background information, financial struggles, and psychological vulnerabilities. This isn't revenge, Peter whispered, stunned. This is predation. Vivian had been selecting people young, desperate men with no lifelines, and drawing them into her world like a black widow spinning silk. Mark, Peter said, voice hollow. Your father was never the beginning. He was just one thread in the web. That night, Ethan barely slept. His thoughts raced, colliding with memories, with fragments of conversations, with the cold look in Vivian's eyes. Every charming gesture, every carefully chosen word had been a move on a board he didn't even know existed. The next day, Ethan met again with Marcus Doyle, who now felt more like a teammate than an outsider. Vivian's not just dangerous because she's rich, Marcus said, sliding over a folder. She's dangerous because she knows how to build belief. She convinces you she's the answer to your pain, then uses that illusion to break you. Ethan flipped through the folder. Inside were psychological reports, notes from therapy sessions, witness statements from ex-employees, a sealed affidavit from a family whose son had once lived with Vivian and disappeared. She isolates her targets, makes them dependent, then controls them through guilt, gratitude, or debt. Ethan nodded. He had lived that. She created a world where I owed her everything: my mother's surgery, my education, a home, and I was supposed to spend the rest of my life paying that back in silence. But you didn't, Marcus said. No, and now I have to make sure no one else does either. They began building a new case file, not just for law enforcement, but for the media. Peter contacted a journalist he trusted, Layla Monroe, a reporter known for her fearless investigative pieces and unshakable ethics. She agreed to meet them. Privately, Layla spent hours going through the documentation. She asked hard questions, made no promises, and left with a copy of everything. A week later, she called Ethan with a single sentence. We're running the story. Front page. Ethan hung up the phone and sat still for a long time. It was happening. The walls were closing in on Vivian Blackstone. Then came the knock on his door. It was Mr. Harris again, this time with a face pale as snow and eyes wet with panic. She knows, he said. She's going to disappear. Ethan stood. How? She's transferring her assets, selling off properties. The staff's been dismissed. She's packing up and going dark. You have to act now. Peter contacted the authorities immediately. With the documents already in federal hands, a judge approved an emergency warrant. The FBI descended on the Blackstone estate the next morning. But Vivian was gone. She'd left behind nothing but an empty house, echoing halls, and one letter on Ethan's former bed. I underestimated you. That was my greatest mistake. But I don't lose. I disappear. You think you've won, but what you've done is provoke a ghost. Ethan read it twice. Then he crumpled it. The investigation gained national attention. Layla's article went viral. Talk shows, podcasts, news anchors all dissecting the rise and fall of the mysterious widow who had seduced the system for over 30 years. Tip lines buzzed with new information. Former associates stepped forward. Victims, employees, investors. A grand jury was assembled. Arrest warrants were issued for her financial officers and board members of her shell charities. But Vivian? Still missing. Ethan struggled with the uncertainty. Every time he walked into a room, he checked over his shoulder. Every shadow felt like her. Every phone call from an unknown number made his pulse race. Yet amid the tension, something surprising happened. He began to receive letters. From strangers, survivors, families broken by stories too similar to his. People who had fallen for the same kind of manipulation, even if not by Vivian's hand. One letter read, "You gave us a voice. Thank you for speaking when the rest of us couldn't." Another, "I thought I was crazy, but reading your story saved me." Ethan realized something profound. Exposing Vivian wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about healing. It was about showing people that even the most powerful abusers could be unmasked, and that the people they targeted weren't weak. But in the following weeks, he partnered with Peter and Marcus to establish a foundation. They called it the Second Chance Initiative, in honor of Harold Brooks, the man who had tried to stop Vivian and paid for it with his life. The initiative offered legal aid to victims of financial manipulation and domestic coercion. It funded investigative journalism. It partnered with whistleblower organizations. And through it all, Ethan never lost focus. He returned to law school with a sharper mind, a heavier heart, and a clearer purpose. Then one day, nearly 4 months after Vivian's disappearance, he received a package. No return address. Inside, a flash drive, and a video. The video showed Vivian older, more fragile, sitting in a dimly lit room somewhere tropical. A drink beside her, dressed in white. "I was never meant for love," she said. "I was meant for control. But you were different. You reminded me of who I once was, long ago, before the war, before Harold, before the lies. You broke the pattern. Ethan, you were my final game, and I lost." She smiled faintly. "If you ever wonder why I didn't destroy you, it's because a part of me was already tired of the game." The screen went black. No signature, no coordinates, no final threat, just silence. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he deleted the file. That night, he stood outside, looking up at the stars, feeling the weight of everything he'd lost and everything he had gained. Vivian Blackstone was gone, but Ethan Walker was still here, and the truth he carried had already begun to set others free. The morning sun spilled gold across the campus as Ethan Walker stood before a crowd that filled the auditorium. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with hope. Students, faculty, guests, hundreds of faces looking up at a man who had become a symbol not only of survival, but of transformation. It was the day of the inaugural ceremony for the Harold Brooks Scholarship Fund for Second Chances, a program Ethan had founded with the remaining legacy left behind by Vivian Blackstone's estate. A fund dedicated to giving opportunity to those who had stumbled, those who had lost their way, those who society had written off. Ethan cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying his voice. "Thank you," he began, voice steady but charged with emotion. "Thank you all for being here on a day that marks more than just a scholarship. It marks a promise that no one is beyond redemption, that no one is beyond hope." He paused, eyes scanning the sea of faces, some familiar, others new. "My journey here has been anything but easy. 7 months ago, I was a young man drowning in debts, shattered by a legacy I never asked for. I thought I knew the story of my father, Marcus Doyle, my mentor, and I learned the hard way that the past isn't always what it seems." He glanced down at his notes, but barely needed them anymore. The words were etched in his heart. My father was accused of crimes he didn't commit. I was drawn into a web of lies spun by Vivian Blackstone, a woman of power who used her wealth and influence to manipulate, to control, and to destroy. I became part of her plan, unknowingly, until I discovered the truth hidden behind closed doors, a truth that was darker than I could have imagined. A hush fell over the room, but the truth set me free, and it gave me a mission: to fight for justice, to fight for those who don't have a voice. This scholarship fund is a testament to that mission, to help those who need a second chance, a new path, a fresh start. Ethan's voice cracked just a little, a reflection of the long nights, the tears, the relentless struggle. Because redemption isn't just about righting wrongs. It's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, your future. He saw a few. People wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding with quiet resolve. After the speech, the applause was thunderous. It wasn't just the celebration of a program, but the celebration of a man who had chosen to rise instead of fall. Outside the sin auditorium, Ethan was greeted by Peter and Marcus. The three embraced, the bond between them stronger than ever. "We did it," Peter said, smiling wide. "You did it." "No," Ethan corrected. "We did it. Together." Marcus pulled out his phone, already taking photos for the foundation's website and social media pages. "This is just the beginning, Ethan." Ethan knew he was right. The path ahead was long, but the foundation was strong. The weeks that followed were a diet whirlwind. Ethan balanced his return to law school with the growing responsibilities of running the foundation. Every day brought new stories. Young people who had escaped abusive situations, individuals fighting wrongful accusations, survivors of fraud and manipulation. The foundation became a beacon, a place where second chances weren't just words, but realities. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in his modest apartment, a courier delivered a thick envelope. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a letter from Vivian Blackstone. "Ethan, I hoped you would never read this. If you do, it means I have finally vanished from your life, and the world you fought so hard to reclaim. I was wrong about you. You were not just a pawn in my game, but a mirror, a reflection of what I once was and what I could have been. I lost myself in my pursuit of control and vengeance, but you have found something far greater, freedom. I hope you find the happiness. I could never hold on to. This is not a goodbye, but a release." Vivian Ethan folded the letter carefully, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over him. He didn't know where Vivian was, or if she ever intended to return, but what he knew for sure was that the past no longer controlled him. Months later, at a foundation gala, Ethan met with several scholarship recipients, bright-eyed young men and women whose stories echoed his own. They laughed, shared dreams, and discussed plans for the future. Maria approached him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "Because of you, I'm going to law school next year. I never thought that was possible." Ethan smiled warmly. MPUs as Ethan Walker stood before a crowd that filled the auditorium. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with hope. "Studden, Maria, this is your fight too. Your second chance. Make it count." She nodded, inspired. That night, Ethan sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city skyline. The stars glittered above like scattered diamonds. He thought of his father, Marcus, Peter, Vivian, the twists and turns that had brought him here. He realized that his life was no longer defined by the mistakes or betrayals of others. It was defined by the choices he made now. To forgive, to fight, to heal. To create a legacy worth leaving. And with that thought, Ethan closed his eyes and smiled. The future was waiting. If this story moved your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe now and join a community where love, hope, and second chances come alive with every story. And if someone needs to hear this, share it. You never know how much one story can change a life.